All right, well, this is an Indian ladder. Who knows how old this is? It's been here for a very long time, long enough for the tribes in this area, at least the Ute tribe, to have been using this ladder to get to the very top of this outcropping of rocks. And it goes all the way up through here. I would say probably about 40, maybe 50 meters up. It's incredible that this Native American ladder is still here.
One last ticket before it's gone. One last summer before it's fall. Tune your strings and play your cards. Little words hit me like a game of darts. And you're beating on my drum. And you're beating on my door. Running faster than my dreams. And I can't stop to breathe. One last lie before the truth. One last fight before I lose. I ask myself, where should I go? Did I do enough to feed my soul? And you're beating on my drum. And you're beating on my door. Running faster than my dreams. And I can't stop to breathe. And you're beating on my drum. And you're beating on my door. Riding faster than my dreams. And I can't stop to breathe.
It's just incredible to think about how these cliff dwellings, they've just been out here for over 700 years, just sitting there. And nobody found them until the late 19th century, like 1890s. These things have just been sitting out here in the desert of southern Colorado. Trying to put myself in the moccasins or the yucca sandals of an Anasazi tribe member who would have lived up here 700 years ago. There's so much peace in this canyon, in this valley, and you're up here with the treetops, just looking out over the treetops. Treetops are pretty trippy. I could actually imagine what it would be like to live here. You've got a little creek down there for your water, and as long as you've got no enemies or anything too severe like that, any kind of pending violence, this place would be heaven. There's really nothing like traveling to sites like this, ruins and archaeological sites, on a motorcycle, because it just gives me total freedom. You know, I mean, I'm not part of a group, a tour group. I don't have to be back to the bus or anything at any time. I can get here whatever time I like, earlier than when most of the other people are showed up. How do you like that English? And it gives me the freedom to just stay here as long as I want. I want to stay here all day, 2 days, 3 days, up to me. There's some area I want to go explore, go find out more about the culture that I'm encountering, go find some more hidden ruins. There's nowhere I can't go on a dual sport motorcycle. Now, the first tribes in this area would have been hunter-gatherers. At that time, they didn't even have the bow and arrow yet. They were using spears and snares, traps, to be able to catch mostly small game like rabbits and animals such as that. And there was a reason for them apparently to begin slowly becoming agrarian, adopting agriculture. For exactly why, we don't know. Usually it's a survival type of situation because hunter-gatherers usually work less hours per year and are more healthy. So what caused them to stop being nomadic and to start building these pueblos? Nobody's quite sure. Here we have the site of one of the first permanent homes, a pit house from around 550 AD. This would have been the beginning of the transition from being hunter-gatherers to an agrarian society. They would build underground because this area, it's almost 7,000 feet, and there is snow starting in October and lasts oftentimes all the way till March and April. So they would have built their homes underground. They would have had a fire hearth for cooking, light and warmth, and these were the first homes. This is what it all started off as. Oh, we can see here at this last site how there was a transition. They had their pit house, and then right next to it, they're starting to learn to cut the sandstone and stack the sandstone and make a plaster between them. And it was the beginning of the single-storied phase of the architecture of the Puebloan peoples. So we can see at this exact spot, this is around 750 AD, they still have their pit home underground. Next to it, though, there's a little house that was above ground and single story, would have most likely had ridgepole, flat roof. And then right next to it is a kiva, which is that deep underground ceremonial pit, because for these people, the earth is sacred. So we can see the beginning of their religious life, their spiritual life is really starting to take on form. When it comes to finding these types of sites, these types of ruins, it's really difficult when it comes to the nomadic hunter-gatherer tribes who are following the big game, because they weren't staying in one place long enough to be able to build these kinds of villages and to build the types of structures that we can see now hundreds and thousands of years later. So for example, down in Mexico, just about 1,200, 1,500 miles from here, we have pyramids that are ancient, thousands of years old. And in the United States, we really don't have anything like that. Well, why is that? Most likely because it's a more cold climate. So the people would have been following the game. They would have been going north with the summer and south with the winter. And they wouldn't have been one place long enough to be able to establish that kind of civilization, that kind of structure of society. So one thing that's very unique about this area is we do have structures that are hundreds of years old because we have agriculture. And it may very well be agriculture that allows for the formation of sites like these, that allows then for a society to develop. We have agriculture. You now have a certain group of people who are just devoted to growing food. And that frees up other people then to be able to build pyramids and create large-scale structures. And so that's what we're seeing happening here, is this transition. And it must have been because this area was so abundant. And the evidence of that is that these old pit houses, they have a storage room next to them, which would have been used to store their surplus of food, which is why they began to come into this more sedentary agrarian lifestyle here instead of following the big game. Here we have the example of a pueblo. This village is circa 800 to 900 AD. So we start coming out of the pit house phase, and we've got full-blown villages being built out of sandstone blocks, which they would have carved from large blocks into smaller blocks. This way, this whole society evolved. And then from here, the next step was they started building up. This was the beginning of a new phase of coming together into large communities in one building, where you'd have these like apartment types of complexes. From here, they started just building up instead of building out. The problem with building out is that you're utilizing your best land, which could be used for agriculture, for housing. But if you just go straight up, then now you can utilize that land for farming. Sun Temple, and the Sun Temple is unlike any other structure at this site. It's believed to be built very late, around 1250. It was believed to be a ceremonial place, also a place used for astronomical observation. They had their high society. They had what was actually more sophisticated in many ways than we like to portray these groups of people as. We like to portray them as being very archaic, very limited. Well, so far we have only been discussing one certain aspect of the evolution of the Pueblo peoples and the Anasazi. This is an Anasazi temple. This was their sun temple. And it's built using the golden ratio. So they had a standard unit of measurement, which is 30.5 centimeters. And they built this temple here in what is a golden rectangle. It's the only site like it in the area. However, they did not find any kind of cooking utensils. They did not find any beams. There's no roofs on this structure. It was an open air structure. So it seems to have had a very different function. And how obvious it was, then they were using this structure here to follow the stars and to chart and to plot astronomical movements. It's evident that this was definitely a spiritual building for them. It also shows that they had a high society, enough to have been able to have mathematical precision. This building is built with precision. It would be difficult for us today to rebuild this monument using the same tools they had, because it's within a precision down to the centimeter. And it's evidence that they had a high society knowledge of astronomy, which probably went back into extreme antiquity, and they were perpetuating that knowledge. So I think it's important to remember that although up until now we've been showing their evolution from a very crude state of hunter-gatherers coming up into learning how to farm and create agriculture, building these pit houses and single level sandstone buildings like this, then full-on apartment style villages, cities. It's also important to remember that they had an ancient knowledge with them as well, which was a high science in the Americas, it's very evident when you go to places like Peru, to the Sacred Valley in Cusco, is evidence of a high culture, high knowledge. It can be very difficult for us to understand what they knew, how ancient their culture really was. This was kind of the birthplace of a new civilization. But that doesn't mean that this is the beginning for them. There was an ancient people even for the ancient ones. Now, there was obviously an older technology left over from perhaps pre-Ice Age society. We get stuck into this very linear idea of history in Western society when in fact human civilization has risen and fallen and risen and fallen so many times in the past on this planet. What's interesting for this area is to see a people transition away from one way of life into another, transitioning from being nomadic to being agrarian. Why did it happen? Why here? It's just as good of questions about why they started becoming farmers as it is why did this civilization disappear. Now, if you ask me, when it comes to their exodus, the disappearance, why they abandoned these sites, they might have been following the climate because the climate has been changing here for hundreds of years. It's become more and more dry. There's been more droughts. There's been more deforestation just by climate change. There is another theory about why they left, and it's a bit more gruesome and grisly, but it is history nonetheless, and therefore we have to take a look at it. And that is where we're going next.